Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you Freaky Deaky by Elmore Leonard. And this is copyright 1988 by Arbor House / Morrow. So the first thing you are saying is, Steve, how can you possibly classify Elmore Leonard as forgotten? And you're absolutely right to say that, because he, I think, truly is one of the most respected crime novelists of the 20th century. His name is mentioned alongside Raymond Chandler, Rex Stout, Ross MacDonald, John D. MacDonald, the great American mystery writers. But I think the reason I can consider him appropriate for Forgotten Mysteries channel is that he was forgotten by me. And there's a reason for that. So get your tomatoes ready to throw at the screen, because a lot of people are not going to like what I'm about to say. But I will redeem myself. 25 years ago, it's all a blur, I had read 3 books by Leonard. I read La Brava, I read Kill Shot, and I read what was the other one? Get Shorty. And at the time, I thought, I don't understand what all the fuss is about. People worship the ground that Elmore Leonard walks on, and I really couldn't see what the big deal was. So I just sort of thought, well, this is me being weird yet again. The world loves Elmore Leonard, but he's not for me. But that's okay. Elmore Leonard didn't need my approval or my book dollars. But I saw Freaky Deaky in a used bookshop a couple months ago, and I thought, this feels like the universe telling me it's time to maybe give him another try, because I do like to go back and visit writers that I read years ago and see if my perception of them changes, if I like them more, if I like them worse. See maybe how I have changed as a reader. What do I notice now that I didn't know then? So, it was sort of like every book is sort of a journey of self-exploration with no ultimate destination or progress, but I try. So I picked up Freaky Deaky, and I have to say, I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a terrific book. But first, a little bit of background. Elmore Leonard doesn't really need much of an introduction. I've already given him one. He was very prolific, very lauded, very much considered, I think, the mystery writer's mystery writer, and had success in all kinds of media. A lot of his books were made into movies or TV series or miniseries or Netflix series. I mean, he was sort of the king of all media, despite Howard Stern's claim to that particular piece of fame. And I have to say, after reading Freaky Deaky, I better understand why he's so cinematic. His books have a cinematic quality to them, even though they may not be large in scope. They may not take place in the world of international intrigue, a la Robert Ludlum. They're very visual and very precise, and really something, I think, quite unique. Leonard had a unique voice, and I'll get into that in a minute. But first, I want to tell you kind of a funny story. So back in the day when I was more actively writing mysteries, I used to go to mystery conventions, and there were people there who were fanatical devotees of Elmore Leonard, to the point of dressing like him and speaking like him. Almost like if you go to a Star Trek convention, half the people walking around are dressed as Klingons or Vulcans or Borg or Andorians or, whatever. Or at a Disney convention, everybody's Cinderella or Prince Charming or Mulan or whoever. So these guys, and they always were guys, affected kind of this Elmore Leonard look, which you can see here is sort of, all black, Johnny Cash with sort of a rakish chapeau, looking kind of noir and maybe a little beatnik. And these guys would sit around talking about Elmore Leonard, or Dutch, as they called him, right? So that was his nickname. So if you eavesdropped on these conversations, you would hear, well, Dutch said that the one thing you should never do in a book is X, and well, Dutch says the third rule of writing is Y, and it was like they were quoting scripture. And so I never really engaged with any of those guys because I thought, going up to them and saying, I don't really think Leonard is all that great. Can you clue me in on what you think is so fantastic about him? I thought then I might be found murdered in the fountain in the lobby of the hotel. But I never did ask that question, but it stayed in my mind. And now, after having read Freaky Deaky, I know why people love him. So let me give you just a little bit about the plot. But before I do that, I want to talk about the definition of the mystery genre. So I think when I was younger, I put mysteries in a box that where the definition of what a mystery was very constrained to, an Agatha Christie type whodunit with an investigator and a cast of suspects and an investigation and a puzzle to be solved. As I've gotten older, I've realized that crime novels there's such a broad spectrum of them that crime fiction really is the better term over mystery. And that's, I think, sort of a very good way to look at the genre because it opens you up to all kinds of different writers and books that you may not have heard of. But, if you're I love whodunits and that's all I want, then, God bless, that's your thing. So what I realized while reading and after finishing this book is that I think it's best described as a crime novel / comedy of errors, in that every time Leonard's characters, and most of them are dirtbags, they're always on the make. They're always out to do something criminal. But every time they make plans, something goes wrong with hilarious effects, right? I mean, people get blown up and, nothing goes according to plan. And as a reader, you really enjoy that because the two key antagonists in this book, they're really, really well drawn, but you don't like them. You don't want them to succeed. Their names are Skip and Robin, and their history is that they had been fellow agitators and lovers back in the 60s, where they were, planting bombs in federal buildings and staging public disturbances and marching and calling police officers pigs. And it was not because they were particularly devoted to any particular issue, such as, anti-war. It was that they just really loved to make trouble. They were just those kind of people. Well, they push things a little too far. They end up in jail. Years after they get out of jail, they bump into each other. And, because they're dirtbags, the first thing they start thinking of is, well, who can we get money out of? Who can we extort money from? And they hit on a guy that they went to school with named Woody, who, by the grace of God, is worth $100 million. His mother gave him all his money and disinherited his younger, much better looking brother. Meanwhile, Woody is, I mean, to call him of low functioning intelligence is a compliment. I mean, if this man has an IQ of 70, that's on the high side of the range. And he doesn't really do himself any favors because all he does is get drunk and do drugs and float around naked in an inner tube in his pool inside his mansion while people try to rip him off. He's just so utterly oblivious to everything. He's like Mr. Magoo, and yet somehow he just manages to skirt all of these plots that are revolving around him that he's completely unaware of. So on the other side of the coin, our hero, Chris Mankowski, is a member of the Detroit police, and he's on the bomb squad. And the first chapter opens with a scene you'll never forget where Chris has to defuse a bomb of a local, on which a local lowlife is sitting. And he's a good guy. You like him. He would be the investigator in this book. He's our moral compass. And even he has a funny backstory in that he's leaving the bomb squad because his girlfriend worries about him. She worries about him getting blown to bits. So he says, well, honey, I'll switch departments because I don't want you to worry. So he switches to the sex crimes unit, at which point she accuses him of being a pervert and, not wanting to be with someone who wants to hang around with the kind of people in that world. And she tosses him out on his ass. So he ends up living with his father in the suburbs. And, the father is kind of an aging Lothario who's having a raging affair with the widow upstairs. That's really fun to read about. But Chris gets on to what's going on with Woody and Robin and Skip, and ultimately puts two and two together. And let's just say he brings about some poetic justice. I don't want to get into any more of the plot details. But he serves his function and he's good company along the way. He meets a woman she's looking for a few bucks too, but she has a better heart and more of a conscience than the other people. And they're sort of a cute couple for a while. Whether they end up together or not, you'll have to read the book to find out. So what I realized when I turned the last page of this book is that Leonard did everything well. The setting, totally enjoyed the Detroit setting. Not a city that I have read a lot about in fiction. I have visited there a couple times on business in the 90s and was kind of shocked to see that urban blight. It was really, burned out buildings and empty lots, and it was just like I couldn't even believe I was in America. But I hear it's making a little bit of a comeback, so that's some good news. But, it has that sort of underworldy feel about it, so everything felt right on target with that. He was a master of drawing characters he just draws them with brush strokes and inks them in, and they're not your everyday characters, right? They're not people per se. They're characters, right? The way you would refer to a friend and say, oh, she's quite a character. That's what these people are. They're all characters who you expect to see in fiction, and yet at the same time, they feel really real. I think Leonard was excellent with dialogue. He just sort of speaks the dialogue of the streets. And he's funny. I mean, I've always said the funniest books in the mystery genre are the hard-boiled noir novels, because those books have detectives and gumshoes dropping these hilarious one-liners, every page. And they're really funny. In comparison, I personally find that books that are marketed to me as, oh, this is a funny novel, usually don't tickle my funny bone. Like that old saying, the harder you try to be funny, the less funny you are. A good example is Donald Westlake. I never found him even the least bit amusing, but I know people who adore him. So again, my tastes are quirky. But Elmore Leonard is funny. He knows how to plot a book. He knows how to keep it going. And he just gives you this really satisfying reading experience where you're kind of tickled throughout. The writing is sharp and very, very unique. I think this is probably why he has this, crazed bunch of fans who, quote him at every step, because I just can't think of anybody else who can write like him. If you said to me, I'll give you $1 million to write in the voice of Elmore Leonard, write a book, I don't think I could do it. I don't think most writers can. The way he combines all of these elements into these sharp as glass paragraphs and sentences and observations, just really a master of all of that. I think someone I could mention in the same breath is Carl Hyacin. I think he's a hoot as well and does the same thing. And also loves to write about dirtbags in Florida. So that's my report. I really enjoyed Freaky Deaky. I feel like in a way that Leonard was an acquaintance of mine from my youth who maybe we didn't really have the chemistry back then to hang out. We just are the circles of our Venn diagram just sort of were tangent to each other. But now I feel like I've aged and we've become reacquainted, and now I want to hang out with him more. So I will definitely be looking for more Elmore Leonards, in future years of my reading life. I think the next one on my list will be Glitz, because I've read and heard really good things about that. One of his last books was called Djibouti, the country in Africa, and that's I just kind of find that to be a fascinating place, but I don't think it's representative of his work, so I probably won't read that one, but I just like the title. So if you've got any Elmore Leonard books to recommend, please do so below. Tell us why you love him. Tell us about your experiences with him. I bet he was a lot of fun to hang out with, although I don't ever actually remember seeing him on panels at any of these mystery conventions. So maybe he was, more of a stay-at-home kind of guy. I don't know. But Dutch Leonard, glad to have remade your acquaintance. And on that note, I will close this video and say thank you, and I'll be back the next time I have a great book to share with you. Good night.